You're lucky we even invited you." The words left her mouth so easily, like they'd been sitting there, waiting for the right moment to sting. The plinking of silverware stopped, the chatter died, and all I could hear was the low hum of the ceiling fan and the pounding in my ears. I sat at the long, polished table my late husband had saved 3 years to buy, 12 chairs, all filled with people who carried my blood or had married into it. But that night, it didn't feel like family. It felt like I'd wandered into someone else's home, uninvited. I remember how the roasted chicken had gone cold on my plate. My fingers trembled slightly as I placed the fork down, careful not to make a sound. My daughter-in-law, Leela, smiled, not kindly, but with that smug, polite curl that people use when they want you to know you're beneath them. My son, Daniel, didn't look up. He never does when Leela speaks like that. He just pressed his lips together, his jaw tight, his eyes darting to his phone. It was his birthday dinner, my son's 35th. I'd ironed my dress for hours that morning, wrapped his gift in blue paper with a gold bow, and baked his favorite lemon cake. And yet there I was, a guest, in my own child's life, lucky to be invited. I felt something deep in my chest shift, a quiet, cold sort of heartbreak. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just smiled, placed my napkin gently on the table, and said, "Excuse me for a moment." No one stopped me as I stood up. Not Daniel, not even my granddaughter, who watched me with wide, confused eyes. I walked down the hallway, the sound of laughter resuming behind me. Leela had already started another story, her voice bright and false. In the quiet of the guest bathroom, I locked the door and leaned against the counter. My reflection stared back. Tired eyes, soft lines. A woman who had spent her life taking care of others. I took out my phone, scrolled to a name I hadn't used in months, and pressed call. When my lawyer answered, I whispered, "Harold, I think it's time we moved forward with the transfer." Before that dinner, things hadn't always been this way. After my husband, Robert, passed away 3 years ago, I moved into the smaller house at the edge of town. The big one, the family home, I left to Daniel and Leela. It was his father's wish. "He's the eldest. He'll take care of you," Robert had said, his hand warm around mine during those final days in the hospital. And for a while, Daniel tried. He really did. He'd call twice a week, stop by with groceries, fix the squeaky door or the leaky faucet. But then Leela came into the picture. Pretty, sharp, ambitious. The kind of woman who always looks like she's already halfway out the door to somewhere more important. She worked in real estate and talked fast about investments, renovations, equity, words that always made Daniel's eyes light up, but left me feeling like an old fool who didn't understand her own home. When they married, I smiled through it. I helped plan the wedding, hemmed her dress myself, and even loaned them money for the down payment on their second property. I thought we were a family, building something together. But after Robert's funeral, things shifted. They stopped visiting. Calls turned into texts into silence. When I did hear from them, it was always practical. "Mom, did you still have those documents for the land title? Mom, can you sign this form? It's just for the refinance." Never, "How are you, Mom?" Still, I told myself it was fine. They were busy. Life moves fast when you're young. I filled my days with little things, tending my garden, volunteering at the library, baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. I had my church group, my books, and my memories. But there was an ache, quiet and constant. The ache of being needed only when convenient. So when Daniel invited me to his birthday dinner, I was thrilled. He hadn't done that in over a year. I spent 2 days preparing, bought him a new watch, wrapped it carefully, even made that lemon cake from scratch. I remember walking into their home that evening, my old home. The scent was familiar. Sandalwood candles, faint lemon cleaner, but the pictures on the walls were all different now. Glossy portraits of Leela, of the kids in matching sweaters, of Daniel in a crisp suit. Not a single one of Robert or me. "Mom," Daniel had said, kissing my cheek. His smile was tight, distracted. "Glad you could make it." "Of course, sweetheart," I'd said. I wouldn't miss it. Leela emerged from the kitchen, perfectly dressed in silk, holding a glass of wine. "Oh, Mrs. Graham," she said, using my last name as though we were acquaintances. "So good you could join us. We weren't sure if you'd be comfortable driving at night." I'd laughed it off. "Oh, I still manage fine." She smiled that same polite, icy smile. Good to hear. Dinner started well enough. Small talk about her job, Daniel's promotion, the children's school. But under the surface, I could feel it. The tension. The way Leela corrected every small detail I said. The way Daniel stayed silent. And then she said it. That one line that turned a quiet ache into something sharper. "You're lucky we even invited you." I don't know what hurt more, her words or the fact that Daniel said nothing at all. That night, after leaving the dinner, I didn't drive home immediately. I sat in my car under the orange streetlight outside their house, listening to the hum of cicadas and the muffled laughter coming from inside. And that's when I made the call. Harold had been my husband's lawyer for over 30 years. He handled everything from our mortgage to our wills. And after Robert died, he told me something that I'd never shared with anyone. Robert had left a clause, a quiet one, that gave me control over certain assets until I passed them on myself. Assets that included their house. Back then, I never intended to use it. But as I sat there in the dark, humiliated and unseen, something inside me settled with quiet certainty. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. The morning after the dinner, I woke up earlier than usual. The air felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath. I brewed myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the light creep across the street. The events of last night replayed in my mind, each detail sharper than the last. The way Leela's voice lilted when she said, "Lucky." The faint snicker from one of the cousins, and Daniel's silence. That silence cut deeper than any insult could. I sipped my tea slowly, trying to calm the restless ache in my chest. But the more I tried to let it go, the more I felt the sting of it. When Harold called me back that morning, his tone was cautious, respectful. "Evelyn," he said, "I got your message. You're sure about proceeding with the transfer?" "Yes," I said softly. "I think it's time." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of pause that holds years of loyalty and unspoken concern. "Robert would have wanted you to be comfortable with your decision," he finally said. "Do you want to meet in person?" "Yes. Let's meet tomorrow." Later that afternoon, I drove to the market to pick up a few things. That's when I saw them. Daniel and Lila standing outside a cafe downtown, laughing with a couple I didn't recognize. Lila's hand rested casually on Daniel's arm, her other hand gesturing animatedly as she spoke. He looked happy, carefree. I parked across the street and watched for a moment, not out of bitterness, but out of disbelief. They looked like strangers, these people who'd once been my family. Then something strange happened. Lila handed Daniel a folder, thin, cream-colored, with a gold clasp. He took it, nodded, and slipped it into his bag. I didn't think much of it at the time, but later that evening, curiosity got the better of me. I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I waited a few hours, then texted. Dinner was lovely, son. I hope you enjoyed your birthday. I left your gift on the table. You didn't open it? He replied 2 hours later. Thanks, Mom. Been busy. We'll talk soon. Just those words. No apology. No warmth. That was when the first real flicker of suspicion began. Busy. Always busy. But with what? The next morning, I drove to Harold's office downtown. He greeted me with the same steady calm he always had, gray suit, glasses perched low on his nose, and a desk that somehow managed to look both chaotic and perfectly organized. We sat across from each other, the old clock ticking in the corner. I went through the file again, he said, sliding a folder toward me. You're still the sole trustee of Robert's estate until you decide to hand over ownership. I nodded. I remembered Robert's voice when we'd signed the papers years ago. It's a safety net, Eve, so no one can take what's ours without your say. Harold continued, If you want, I can begin the transfer process. The house, the joint investments, everything would revert to your direct ownership. Let's start with the house, I said. The rest can wait. He hesitated. That's Daniel's home now. You're sure? I looked down at my hands, folded neatly in my lap. Yes, I said. For now, it's just paperwork, but I need to remind them whose name is still on the deed. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said he understood without judgment. I'll draft the documents today. That afternoon, I drove to the edge of town to the family house. I didn't go inside. I just parked across the street again, watching from my car. Through the big front window, I could see Lila arranging flowers, her movements brisk and precise. Daniel sat on the couch with his laptop open, papers spread out on the table. I almost turned away until I saw her pick up the same cream-colored folder from his bag. She flipped through it quickly, frowning. Then she took out a pen and scribbled something on the top page. That image stuck with me. Her confident handwriting, her control over everything. When I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, Harold called. Evelyn, he said, there's something I think you should know. I ran a quick check on the property records this morning. Your son and daughter-in-law have submitted preliminary documents for a home equity withdrawal. I froze. They what? They're trying to take a loan against the house. But they don't own it, I whispered. Exactly. I closed my eyes, the memory of Lila's voice echoing in my head. You're lucky we even invited you. That's when it clicked. The folder, the cafe, her confidence. They weren't just disrespecting me, they were planning something bigger. I spent the rest of that day in a strange mix of calm and fury. I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies just to keep my hands busy, though I barely remembered doing it. When the oven timer dinged, I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the golden edges of the cookies and realizing how quiet my house had become over the years. Then, as the scent of cinnamon filled the air, a thought came to me, clear and sharp. If they were willing to take my home, the one Robert and I built from scratch, without my knowledge, then maybe it was time to remind them who built everything they were standing on. That evening, I wrote a letter. Not to Daniel, but to myself. A list of everything I'd done for that family, every sacrifice, every kindness that had gone unnoticed. At the bottom, I wrote one line in bold ink. I will no longer be treated like a guest in my own family. Then I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into my journal. The next morning, I called Harold. Go ahead with the transfer, I said, and make sure they get a copy of the notice. That was the moment the storm began. Quiet, deliberate, and entirely mine to command. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't confront them. I simply waited. And within a week, I got my first call. This time, from Daniel. Mom, he said, his tone unsteady, We got a letter from the county office. It says there's been a change in property ownership. Did you do something? I paused, letting the silence stretch. Yes, I said finally. I did. When Daniel called that night, I could hear Leela in the background, a sharp, restless voice, low but unmistakably angry. Ask her, she hissed. Ask her why she did it without warning. I could almost picture her pacing the room, her manicured nails clicking against her phone case. Mom, Daniel said again, more firmly this time, what's going on? We just got a letter saying the deed was transferred solely to your name. Is this some kind of mistake? I took a breath and looked out the window. The sun had set, leaving streaks of red and gold across the horizon, the same colors Robert loved to paint in his sunsets. No, it's not a mistake, I said softly. The house has always been in my name. I just made sure it stays that way. There was silence. Then the shuffle of movement, the faint sound of Leela whispering something sharp. Mom, you can't just... I can, I interrupted gently, and I did. It's a legal safeguard. You should have read the documents before applying for a loan against it. That last part hung in the air like smoke. Daniel's voice changed, softer, trembling. How did you... I have my ways, Daniel, I said, my tone calm but heavy. You should have told me. Then came the sound I wasn't ready for, not words, but a choked, frustrated sigh. It wasn't like that, Mom, he said finally. Leela and we just wanted to remodel the house, make it ours. We didn't mean to go behind your back. There it was, the half-truth, the lie wrapped in good intentions. I could almost believe him if I hadn't seen Leela that day, handing him that folder like a general handing battle plans to her soldier. Daniel, I said quietly, you're my son. I've trusted you with everything I have. But this wasn't remodeling. It was rewriting history. He didn't reply. Tell Leela, I continued, that from now on, all financial decisions related to the property go through me. And you're both welcome to stay, as long as you remember whose name is on the door. I hung up before he could respond. The following days were strangely peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm passes or before another begins. I went back to my routines, tending the garden, baking bread, visiting the library. On the outside, everything seemed calm. But beneath that calm, there was a weight. I hadn't wanted to humiliate them. I'd only wanted to protect myself, to remind them of boundaries. But deep down, I knew that wasn't how Leela would see it. And I was right. 3 days later, she showed up at my door. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock, quick, impatient, like someone tapping their foot through the wood. When I opened the door, there she stood, hair perfectly styled, red lipstick sharp as her tone. Evelyn, she said, her voice sweet but tight. We need to talk. I gestured toward the living room. Come in. She didn't sit. She stayed standing, arms crossed, eyes glinting. I know what you did, she said. You had no right to change the deed. Actually, I replied, I had every right. The property is mine. Always has been. Her jaw tightened. Daniel and I were counting on that money. We needed it. For what? I asked, though I already suspected. She hesitated. To start a business. I raised an eyebrow. A business? Or a separate investment account? Her eyes flickered a tiny tell. I'm not stupid, Leela, I said, my voice low. I know you've been meeting with a financial advisor. And I know you used my property as leverage. That cracked her composure. Her lips trembled before she quickly straightened. You don't understand, she said. We were trying to secure our future. Daniel doesn't make as much as he used to, and frankly, you don't need that kind of money just sitting there. The audacity of it hit me like a slap. I don't need it? I repeated, each word deliberate. Leela, that house was my life's work. Robert and I built every wall with our own hands. That home is more than property. It's memory. It's love. It's everything we worked for. And you thought it was just sitting there? She looked away, muttering something under her breath. I've seen this before, I said quietly. People who think they're owed something because they married into it. But let me remind you, I welcomed you into that home. I gave you my trust. Her voice cracked, sharp and defensive. You're making me sound like a thief. I sighed, then stopped acting like one. That broke her. For a second, I saw it. The flicker of guilt, the realization that she'd gone too far. But pride is a dangerous thing. She straightened again and said coldly, You may have the house, Evelyn, but don't forget Daniel is my husband. He'll always choose me. I nodded slowly, feeling the sting, but also something else. Clarity. Then, I hope, I said softly, he chooses wisely. She left without another word, slamming the door behind her so hard that the picture frame on the wall rattled. That night, Daniel called again. His voice was tense, exhausted. Mom, why are you doing this? Leela's in tears. She thinks you're trying to turn me against her. I let out a weary sigh. No, Daniel, I'm trying to remind you who you are. You've lost sight of it. He was quiet. Then, softly, maybe you have too. That one hurt more than anything Leela could have said. Later that evening, I sat in my study with a glass of red wine, staring at an old photograph. Daniel, at age 10, holding a hammer too big for his hands. Robert smiling beside him as they built the porch. How had that little boy become a man so easily swayed by someone else's ambition? The truth settled in, heavy and cold. Somewhere along the way, I had let my silence become permission. They thought my quiet meant weakness. It was time they learned what quiet strength really looked like. So I picked up my phone and called Harold again. Harold, I said, I'd like to finalize the transfer of all remaining assets, and I want to add one clause, effective immediately. What kind of clause? He asked. I smiled faintly. If Daniel and Leela wish to remain in the property, they can, but they'll pay rent. Fair market rate. It'll be automatically deducted and put toward a family trust for my grandchildren. Harold chuckled softly. You really don't miss a step, do you? Not anymore, I said. I've spent too long being grateful for invitations to my own table. The next day, Harold delivered the documents to their house himself. By evening, my phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Daniel. Mom, what's this? Rent? You're charging us to live here? I typed back calmly, No, Daniel, I'm teaching you to value what was freely given. When I woke the next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Even the wind seemed to pause, as if waiting for what would happen next. I made coffee, sat by the window, and waited for Daniel's car to pull up. I didn't have to wait long. By 8:15, I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel, the slam of a car door, hurried footsteps up the porch. Then, the knock. 3 sharp raps. I didn't move right away. I let him knock again, harder this time. When I finally opened the door, Daniel stood there, eyes bloodshot, hair tousled, holding the manila envelope Harold must have given him. Mom, he said, his voice already raised, what is this supposed to be? Rent? Are you serious? I gestured toward the kitchen. Come in, let's talk. He followed, still fuming, the envelope crumpled in his fist. Sit, I said, motioning to the table. He did, though reluctantly. I poured him a cup of coffee. He didn't touch it. Daniel, I began, my voice calm but firm, this isn't punishment. It's structure. You and Leela want independence, but you've built it on something that isn't yours. You need to learn what it means to contribute. His jaw tightened. Contribute? I've been taking care of this place for years. Mowing the lawn, fixing the gutters. I cut him off gently. Maintenance isn't ownership. He went quiet. His breathing was heavy, angry. Then, after a pause, he said, "You're doing this because you hate her, aren't you?" The words hit like a dart. "Daniel," I started, but he leaned forward, eyes burning. "You've never legged Leela. You've made it clear from the start. You think she's manipulative, but you're the one pulling strings now." I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "I don't hate her, Daniel. I hate what she's made you forget." He frowned. "Forget what?" "Who you are," I said quietly. "The boy who helped his father build this porch. The man who used to talk about starting his own business, not for profit, but for passion. You've traded that for quick gains and borrowed money." He looked away, his face softening for a moment, but then the wall went up again. "Maybe people change, Mom. Maybe I'm not that boy anymore." "Maybe," I said softly, "but maybe you've just been listening to the wrong voice for too long." His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the envelope. This is going to ruin us," he said, almost to himself. I tilted my head. "No, Daniel. This might be what saves you." He left without another word. I watched his car disappear down the road, my heart heavy, but also strangely certain. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. That night, I expected silence, but instead there was a storm, literally and figuratively. Rain battered the windows as the thunder rolled in, and just past midnight, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Leela. "You think you've won, but you just drove your son away." I stared at it for a moment, then locked the phone and set it face down on the table. Because deep down, I knew she might be right. Days passed. No calls, no visits, just absence, thick and echoing through the house. At first, I filled the silence with chores, cleaning out closets, baking bread, watering the garden, anything to drown out the ache. But on the fourth day, I found something that stopped me cold. In the attic, tucked behind a box of old Christmas lights, was an envelope, yellowed, sealed with my late husband's handwriting. It was addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note, written years before Robert passed. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And I know you, Eve. You're trying to hold everything together again. Don't forget. The house is just walls. What makes it home is the love we protect inside it. Even if they hurt you, protect that love. It's what will bring them back." The tears came before I could stop them. That night, I didn't drink wine or make tea. I just sat by the fireplace and thought about what Robert had written. He'd always been softer than I was, more forgiving, more patient. And maybe that's why Daniel needed both of us. Maybe I had been too strong for too long. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned to do. I called Daniel. It rang twice before he answered, his voice guarded. "Mom?" "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly. "I'm not calling to argue. I just wanted to check if you're okay." He hesitated. "We're fine. How's Lila?" A pause. She's been upset." "I can imagine," I said. "Listen, Daniel, I don't want this to turn into a war. The rent stands, but I'm willing to help you both plan for the future. Not by giving, but by guiding." He was silent. Then, quietly, he said, "Why now, Mom? After everything?" I smiled faintly. "Because your father reminded me why we built that house in the first place. It wasn't to own something, it was to build something that lasts." He didn't speak for a long time. I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the background, maybe from his car. Finally, he said, "I don't know if Lila will go for that." "I'm not asking her," I said gently. "I'm asking you." Another long pause. Then, softly, "Okay." When I hung up, I exhaled deeply, realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Later that evening, I lit a candle by Robert's photo and whispered, "You're right. Love doesn't mean surrender. It just means knowing when to stop fighting and start healing." Outside, the rain had stopped. The garden glistened under the moonlight, fragile, new, alive. For the first time in months, I slept without dreams. 3 weeks passed before I saw Daniel again. It was a Sunday morning, the kind that smelled like wet grass and new beginnings. I was in the garden, pruning the lavender, when I heard a car door close. When I looked up, Daniel was standing by the gate. He looked different, tired, thinner, but softer somehow. There was something in his eyes that reminded me of the boy he used to be, the boy who once chased fireflies in that very yard. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. I wiped my hands on my apron and smiled. "Hi, sweetheart." He hesitated, glancing at the porch. "Can we talk?" "Of course." We sat at the wooden table under the old oak. The sun filtered through the leaves, dappling his face in gold and shadow. He didn't speak for a long while, just fiddled with the envelope he held in his hands. Finally, he said, "Lila and we've been staying at her cousin's place. Things have been tense." I nodded, waiting. "She's angry, says you're trying to control me. But..." He trailed off, then looked up at me. "I think I finally understand what you meant." I said nothing. I let him speak. I looked through the papers Harold gave me, the trust, the loan details, and I saw how much you've been covering: taxes, insurance, everything. I didn't know. His voice cracked on that last word. I reached out and placed my hand over his. "You weren't supposed to carry that burden, Daniel. I was." He shook his head. "No, I was supposed to learn how. And I didn't. I let Leela talk me into thinking we deserved everything without earning it." There was pain in his voice. Not anger this time, but shame. "She's not a bad person," he continued softly. She grew up with nothing. And when she got something, she was terrified of losing it." That sentence, more than any other, softened me. Because it was true. Fear can turn love into pride. I sighed. "I don't hate her, Daniel. I never did. I just wanted you both to understand that family doesn't mean ownership. It means responsibility." He nodded. "I know that now." He handed me the envelope. Inside was a check. A small one, but it was something. "Our first month's rent," he said. "We're moving into a small apartment across town, just until we can stand on our own. I wanted you to have this." I stared at it, then at him. "You don't have to." "I do," he said firmly. "You taught me that." That afternoon, he stayed for lunch. We made chicken stew, his father's favorite, and talked about simple things: the garden, his work, the way the neighborhood had changed. For the first time in years, there was no tension between us, just peace. When he left, he hugged me, really hugged me, the kind of embrace that said, "Thank you," and "I'm sorry," all at once. As his car disappeared down the road, I whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, because somehow, through all the hurt, something sacred had survived. 2 months later, Thanksgiving came around. I didn't expect an invitation. After all, things were still delicate. But that morning, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Mom, dinner's at 6. Please come. Lila asked me to make sure you do." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "I'll be there." When I arrived that evening, their apartment was small but warm. The table was set with mismatched plates, candles flickering between bowls of mashed potatoes and gravy. Lila was in the kitchen, wearing an apron that read, "Kiss the cook." When she saw me, she hesitated, then smiled a shy, tentative smile. "Mrs. Reeves," she said softly, "I'm glad you came." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. There was a pause. that awkward kind of silence that holds too much history. Then, to my surprise, she stepped forward and handed me a plate of rolls. "I made your recipe," she said, "the honey butter ones." I looked down at them, golden, soft, just like I used to make. "Smells perfect," I said. Her eyes glistened a little. I wanted to get it right. We sat down to eat. Conversation flowed slowly at first, polite, cautious, but then it loosened, warmed by laughter and shared stories. At one point, Lila said, "I owe you an apology." The table went quiet. "For what I said," she continued, "at dinner. I was angry and proud and wrong. You didn't deserve that." My throat tightened. "Thank you, Lila. That means a lot." "I didn't understand," she said. "Now I do. You weren't trying to take anything from us. You were trying to give us a foundation." Daniel reached over and took her hand. "We're both sorry, Mom." And for the first time, I saw not arrogance or defiance in her face, but humility, growth. That was the real victory. After dinner, Leela packed me a box of leftovers like I used to do for Daniel when he was young. When I reached the door, she said quietly, "Next week, we're signing papers for our first home. It's small, but it's ours. I'd like you to see it when it's ready." I smiled, touched her cheek gently. "I'd love that." She nodded, her eyes misty. As I stepped outside, the night air was cool and clean. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something that had been missing for years. Peace. Real peace. Not the silence of avoidance, but the quiet that comes when love finally settles into its rightful place. Back home, I set the leftover box on the counter and lit a single candle by Robert's photo. "I think we did it," I whispered, "in our own way." The flame flickered softly, and in that moment, I could almost feel his presence beside me, not in a haunting way, but in the gentle way memories sometimes live. Then I sat down, took one of Leela's rolls, and smiled through the tears. Because even though the path had been painful, it led us here, to healing, to understanding, to family. And maybe that's all any of us can hope for in the end. Family can wound us in ways no stranger ever could, because when love and pride collide, the scars run deep, and sometimes the only way to heal is to step back, even when it breaks your heart. That night at the dinner table, when Leela said, "You're lucky we even invited you," I felt something shatter inside me. It wasn't just about the words. It was about everything those words stood for. The distance, the disrespect, the years of giving without gratitude. But looking back now, I realized something. Sometimes walking away isn't an act of surrender. It's an act of faith. Faith that truth will find its way to light. I didn't scream. I didn't humiliate her in front of everyone. I just made one call. And that call didn't just change my future. It changed hers too.
Because sometimes lessons aren't learned through anger. They're learned through consequence. Still, life has a way of softening the sharpest edges. Months later, when I tasted the rolls Leela baked with her own hands, I didn't taste resentment anymore. I tasted understanding, growth, humility. Maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not forgetting what happened, but letting go of the need to keep proving that we were right. I won't pretend it was easy. It never is. But peace doesn't come from winning the argument. It comes from learning when to speak and when to let silence do the teaching. So, tell me, my dear, if you were sitting at that dinner table and your daughter-in-law said those words to you, would you have walked away like I did? Or would you have fought back right then and there? I'd love to know what you would have done. Share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes the lessons we learn from each other are the ones that heal us the most. And if my story touched your heart tonight, Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join me again tomorrow for another story, another voice, and maybe another truth about the way families love, hurt, and forgive.